I was in a coma and heard my family praying for my death, for the inheritance. I never imagined that the worst thing I could ever go through wasn't the accident itself, but what came after. I was in a coma for over a month following a motorbike crash, but I could hear everything. I could feel it all. And when I finally woke up, what I heard was something I could never forget. My own mother and sister praying for my death so they could inherit my money. I thought I knew them, but I had no idea how deep the betrayal ran. It all started one Saturday afternoon when I decided to go for a ride. I was an experienced motorcyclist, always careful, but that day I was feeling a bit reckless. It wasn't my usual route. The sun was shining and the roads were empty, which made it feel like the world was mine for the taking. But that was the last thing I remember before the accident. I was speeding down a straight road when something caught my eye. I swerved to avoid it, only to lose control. I hit the curb and everything went black. The next few days, or maybe weeks, are a blur. I have no memory of the crash aftermath, just fragments of voices, flashes of light, and a sense of being pulled in and out of consciousness. I couldn't see or move, but I could hear everything around me. I remember the sound of machines beeping and the occasional voice. My sister, Rachel, would visit me sometimes. She'd talk about work, how things were going at the office, but her tone always felt off, like she was pretending everything was fine. My mom would stop by too, but I could never remember if she stayed long enough to truly talk to me. It wasn't until much later that I realized how much more was going on behind the scenes. It happened on a quiet afternoon, while I was in and out of consciousness, that I overheard something that made my blood run cold. I don't know exactly how long I had been unconscious at that point, but I was lying there, barely able to move or open my eyes. I could only hear the muffled sounds around me, and for some reason, I thought I was dreaming when I heard their voices, my mother and sister. "I don't know, Rachel," my mom said, her voice low and hesitant, like she was trying to be quiet, but I could hear every word. "I'm not sure he'll make it out of this. I think we need to prepare ourselves for the worst." Rachel's voice responded, a touch more upbeat, but still filled with an edge that I couldn't ignore. "I get it, Mom, but if he doesn't pull through, it's not like we'd be left with nothing, right? The money, the house, everything would be ours." I froze. My heart felt like it had stopped beating in my chest. The words rang in my ears, louder than any beeping machine could drown out. "Do you think he'd even have the will to live?" Rachel continued. "I don't know. But if he's going to keep being a burden like this, the inheritance is all we've got left." My mom's voice wavered as she answered. "I don't want to say it, but if he doesn't pull through, I won't have to deal with the stress anymore. It's a lot of responsibility for me, and I'm tired." I felt like my body had been hit by a freight train. They were hoping I'd die. My own family, the people I trusted the most, were willing to let me go just to get their hands on my inheritance. I could hardly breathe. I felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over me. I had no idea this was how they truly felt. That's when it hit me. The same family who had always appeared to love and support me was now wishing for my death. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about what they stood to gain. As I lay there, still unable to move or respond, the anger inside me began to simmer. It wasn't just the fact that my family was hoping for my death. It was the total disregard they had for me as a person, for my life. For all those years they pretended to love me, to care for me, to be my family. But here they were, discussing my death like it was a business transaction, something that could be solved with a few legal papers and an inheritance. The worst part? They didn't even think I could hear them. The voices continued, their words as sharp as daggers. "Mom," Rachel said, "don't you think we should start making some moves? The doctors don't look optimistic. We could start preparing for what's next. The sooner we get things in order, the better." There was a long pause before my mom responded. "You're right, but it still feels wrong. What if he wakes up? What if he gets better?" Rachel scoffed. "We both know that's a long shot. He's been in a coma for weeks now. He's not coming back, Mom. You know it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to open my eyes and confront them, to yell at them, to let them know I was still here. But I couldn't. I was stuck, trapped in my own body, forced to listen to them talk about me like I was already gone. I don't want to say it, but if he does wake up, we'll deal with it then. But I'm not going to let his situation drag us down, Rachel continued, her tone cold and calculating. If I have to carry the weight of this family, I will. But I can't do it alone. I'm ready for a fresh start. I could feel my heart sinking lower with each word. How could they be so heartless? How could they have been plotting my death, all while I was lying here in a coma, unable to defend myself? I had always known Rachel was a bit self-centered. She'd always been the type to take what she could and move on. But to hear her talk about my death like it was a business opportunity, it broke something inside me that I wasn't sure would ever heal. But I still couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was listen as the plan for my demise played out. And it felt like every second was another blow to my soul. I could barely process everything, but I knew one thing. I had to survive this. I couldn't let them win. Make sure to like the video and subscribe so you never miss more shocking and real stories like this one. When I finally woke up from the coma, it felt like a slow return to the world I once knew. The beeping machines, the sterile smell of the hospital room, and the muted voices in the background all hit me at once. But the hardest part? The realization that I was still trapped in my body, unable to move, to speak. I could hear everything, but I couldn't react. It took a while for the doctors to notice I was awake, but once they did, they rushed in to check my vitals. I could see the confusion on their faces, the surprise that I had made it through, but all I could focus on was the conversation I had overheard, the betrayal, the lies, the disgusting plan they had in motion. Days passed before I was able to move even slightly, but I could feel my mind racing. I knew I had to confront my mother and sister. I had to find a way to make them understand that I was still here, still alive, and I wasn't going to let them get away with what they had said. The hardest part wasn't just what I had heard. It was the realization that these were the people I had trusted most in my life. My own flesh and blood were plotting against me for something as trivial as money. The idea of it made me sick to my stomach, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had known about love and loyalty was a lie. The hospital room felt suffocating, but I had to stay strong. I couldn't let them see me as weak. I couldn't let them think I was a victim. Finally, after a few more days, I was able to speak. My first words were barely a whisper, but they felt like a victory. I couldn't wait to say what needed to be said. When my mom came into the room, looking as though nothing had happened, I forced myself to speak. "I heard everything," I said, my voice weak but steady. "I know what you said." Her face drained of color. She froze, eyes wide with shock and guilt. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I could feel the anger rising in me again. "How could you, Mom? How could you and Rachel want me dead just for an inheritance?" The room was silent. My mom was standing there, frozen, as if she couldn't comprehend what I had just said. I saw the guilt written all over her face, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo what had been done, or to make me forget the horrible conversation I had overheard while lying in a coma. For a moment, she just stared at me, unsure of what to say. Her lips trembled, and I could see her eyes starting to well up with tears. I didn't know you could hear us," she whispered, almost pleadingly. "It wasn't like that, I swear. You're being dramatic." I shook my head in disbelief. Dramatic? Was she really trying to brush it off like it was nothing? I had just heard her wish for my death so she could inherit my life, and now she was trying to downplay it? "No, Mom," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I heard every word. You and Rachel were talking about how you'd get everything if I died, how it'd be easier on both of you. You weren't worried about me. You were planning your future." The tears in her eyes weren't an apology. They were tears of guilt, yes, but also a bit of frustration, like she was trying to explain away something that couldn't be explained. "I never wanted you to die, son. She paused, looking down at her hands. "I was scared. I was overwhelmed with everything. I didn't know how to handle it." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Handle it? You wanted me to die so you could take my stuff, and now you're trying to justify it?" Mom took a shaky breath, clearly trying to hold herself together. "I wasn't thinking clearly. You were in a coma, and we didn't know if you'd wake up. We didn't know what to do. Rachel, she said things in the heat of the moment. You know how she is." "Don't even try to blame Rachel," I snapped. "She's just as bad as you. You both were just sitting there, making plans for my death like it was some kind of transaction. I was never a person to you, was I?" She finally broke down in front of me, sobbing uncontrollably. But even that didn't soften the anger I felt. She had crossed a line, and nothing could erase what I had heard. "You're right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I've failed you in every way." I looked away from her, trying to hold back my own tears. The woman who had given me life was now the one who had tried to take it all away. I had always thought she was my rock, but now I saw her for what she truly was, a coward, hiding behind her own insecurities and fears, willing to betray her own son. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom," I said, the words coming out heavy. "I don't know if I ever will." The next few days were some of the most painful of my life. My body was still recovering from the accident, but the emotional toll of everything was almost too much to bear. I spent my time trying to process the betrayal, but what hurt the most was the fact that I still had to confront my sister, Rachel. She came to the hospital a few days after my conversation with Mom. I wasn't sure how I felt about seeing her. I had always been the one who tried to keep the peace in our family, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I could even look at her without feeling disgusted. When she walked in, she tried to act as if nothing was wrong. She smiled at me, her usual confident, carefree expression on her face. But there was a tension in the air, and I could feel it the moment she stepped through the door. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her, wondering how I was supposed to react. "Hey, big brother," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "How are you feeling? You're looking better. Doctors say you're making a good recovery." I couldn't stand it anymore. "You have some nerve, Rachel," I snapped. "How could you? How could you sit there knowing what you said and act like everything's normal?" Her smile faltered and she took a step back. "What are you talking about?" I let the words hang in the air for a moment before I finally said it. "I heard everything. I heard what you and Mom were talking about while I was in a coma. You both hoped I'd die. You were planning on how you'd get the inheritance." The color drained from Rachel's face, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine shock in her eyes. You heard us?" I nodded, my fists clenched. "I was conscious enough to hear everything. You weren't just hoping I wouldn't wake up. You were counting on it." Rachel stood there, speechless. The confident, untouchable sister I'd known for so long suddenly looked smaller, more vulnerable. "Mark, I didn't mean it like that," she finally said, her voice cracking. "It wasn't like I wanted you to die. It just felt like everything was slipping away." "Slipping away?" I repeated, my voice rising in anger. "You were ready to let me die. You were talking about it like it was just a matter of when. And you think you can just explain it away like it's no big deal?" She looked down at the ground, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. I could see the guilt in her eyes now, but it was too little, too late. I was scared, okay? I was scared of losing everything. Mom and I were already struggling with everything. I didn't know what else to do. "So, you thought the answer was to wish me dead?" I spat, my heart pounding with the pain of it all. "I wasn't thinking straight," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Mark. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but please, I didn't mean it. I never meant for you to hear that." I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. "It doesn't matter now. The damage is done. You can't just take it back, Rachel. What you and Mom did, what you said, it's changed everything." She reached out, trying to touch my hand, but I pulled away. The distance between us now felt so much greater than it ever had before. "I'm sorry," Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I hope someday you'll understand how messed up everything got." I said nothing. I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could I say? How could I find words for the betrayal that ran so deep? In the weeks that followed, I kept my distance from everyone. I couldn't talk to Rachel without the anger rising again. I couldn't face my mom without seeing the woman who had once been my protector turn into someone completely unrecognizable. The truth was, I was lost. My life had been turned upside down, and I had no idea where to go from there. The hardest part was that I felt alone. Even though I was surrounded by family, I felt like no one really cared about me. They didn't care about the emotional damage they had done. It was just about themselves, about what they could get out of my situation. I continued the process of healing physically, but emotionally, I was a wreck. I started spending more time alone, not answering calls or texts. My friends tried to check in, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to anyone. What could I say? "Hey, guess what? My family wanted me dead so they could inherit my stuff." It was too much to explain and too painful to relive. One evening, I sat in my apartment, scrolling through my phone, when I came across a picture of Liz and me from a family gathering. It was from before everything fell apart. We were laughing, carefree, happy. Looking at that photo made my chest tighten. I could barely recognize the people in that picture anymore. My family, my life, felt like it was from a different world, a different time. But I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. They hadn't just hurt me, they had betrayed me, and they hadn't shown a fraction of remorse until it was too late. My trust in them had been shattered, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was no going back. I needed to make a decision. I could keep fighting for a relationship with people who never truly cared, or I could walk away and start over, alone but free. I couldn't keep living like this, caught between the past and the painful reality of what my family had become. I had already made up my mind. I was done. I wasn't going to let my mother and Rachel control my emotions or my life any longer. The anger, the betrayal, it was all weighing me down. But I knew that if I didn't take control, I'd be stuck in this cycle of hurt forever. The first step was cutting them off. I didn't need their toxic presence in my life. So I blocked their numbers, ignored their messages, and took a break from the world I had known. The feeling of freedom was strange at first. It felt like I was walking away from everything, but in truth, I was finally walking towards something better. Myself. I started focusing on my own healing. I got back into the things that made me feel like me: writing, going to therapy, exercising, and reconnecting with old friends I had neglected over the years. Slowly but surely, I was rebuilding my life without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. But the journey wasn't easy. I was angry, frustrated, and still reeling from the fact that the people who were supposed to have my back had instead tried to bury me for their gain. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, when all I could do was replay their words in my mind, wondering how it all went wrong. But I kept reminding myself of why I had made the choice to cut them out. Because I deserved better. I deserved to feel safe and loved, and not to be treated as a pawn in their game of inheritance. Then, one day, out of nowhere, I received a letter from my mother. I almost didn't open it. I thought about just tossing it in the trash, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the small hope that maybe, just maybe, they had finally understood the magnitude of their actions. The letter was brief. Mark, I know I've hurt you more than I can ever apologize for. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry. What I said and did was wrong, and I've had to face the reality of the person I became. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I love you, always have. Mom, I read the letter 3 times. It was sincere, but it didn't change the fact that the damage was done. It didn't change the fact that I had lost everything I thought was real. I crumpled the letter in my hand and threw it away. It was too little, too late. After the letter, I realized something. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed my family. It wasn't something I needed to give them just because they finally recognized their mistakes. What I needed was peace, and that meant finally accepting that some relationships couldn't be repaired. I began to focus more on my future instead of holding on to the wreckage of the past. I threw myself into work, into my health, and into my own happiness. There were days when the pain would resurface, but each time, I would remind myself that I was stronger than the betrayal. I had learned to trust myself again, and that was the most important thing. Months passed, and slowly I started to feel like myself again. It wasn't easy. Some nights, I would still wake up in a cold sweat, my mind racing back to that hospital bed, hearing my family plotting against me. But I knew I couldn't let that define me anymore. They were the ones who had lost, not me. I began dating again, something I hadn't even considered while trapped in the toxic environment my family had created. It felt good to open myself up again, to trust people who actually respected me. For the first time in a long time, I was experiencing joy without the cloud of betrayal hanging over my head. One evening, a few months after everything had blown up, I sat alone on my couch, reflecting on how far I had come. It was strange. I had spent so many years trying to please my family, trying to make them proud of me, only to realize that it wasn't worth it. I had wasted so much energy on people who never truly had my best interests at heart. But now I was finally free. I thought back to the moment when I first realized what they had done, how my life was shattered in an instant by the people I trusted the most. But what I learned from that moment was invaluable. I am stronger than the people who betrayed me. I don't need their approval or love to validate who I am. I am enough, Time moved on, and so did I. The healing wasn't a straight line, but it was progress. Each day I felt a little stronger, a little more at peace. I surrounded myself with friends who supported me and cared about me for who I was, not for what I could provide them or what they could gain from me. I started doing things for myself, things that made me feel alive again, not just like I was going through the motions of survival. But despite all the positive steps I was taking, there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the betrayal, the part of me that still wondered if there was some way to fix things, some way to repair the brokenness in my family. I kept asking myself, could I ever forgive them? Was there a way to get back to the way things were before everything fell apart? One day, I received a call from my father. I hadn't spoken to him in months, and I wasn't sure what to expect. When I answered, his voice was calm, but I could sense a sadness in it. "Mark," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you, about the family. I don't know if we can ever fix what's been broken, but I want you to know that I regret everything. I should have seen the signs, and I should have been there for you. I know I can't change the past, but I want to make things right, if you'll let me." For the first time, I felt like my dad truly understood the gravity of everything. The weight of his words wasn't lost on me, but the truth was, I still didn't know how to move forward with him. I didn't know if I could trust him again. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad," I replied, my voice shaky. "I don't know if I can forgive any of you. You let this happen. You didn't see the signs. You didn't protect me. And for that, I don't know if things can ever be the same." "I know, Mark," he said quietly. "I know, but I'm asking for a chance to make it right, to show you that I can be there for you, even if it's not the same as it was before." I paused, weighing his words. I didn't know if I could trust him. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive him for the years of enabling Jake and ignoring my pain. But one thing was clear. I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had been so desperate for approval, for love. I had learned to stand on my own, to rebuild myself, and I wasn't sure I needed their approval anymore. "I'm not ready yet," I said finally. "Maybe someday, but not now. I need to keep moving forward, and I can't go backward anymore." And just like that, I closed that chapter of my life. I didn't know what the future held, but I was no longer defined by my past. I was stronger for having survived it, and I wasn't going to let anyone else control my story. Have you ever faced a betrayal that changed everything? How did you move forward? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this story helpful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Let's heal together and keep pushing forward.